learn your people. Like take the time, do an assessment. You can use one of mine, you can use somebody else's, I don't care, but like do an evaluation of your team, because 9 times out of 10, the people aren't the problem. Your inability to adapt and your lack of leadership skills are actually the issue.
Welcome to the Raquel Show. This show is for entrepreneurs who want to play bigger in business and in life. And today I have a very special guest that I met at an event. And because I work with top performing agents, teams, and companies, I was intrigued by what he said. And when you're growing a business, not only do you need to level up what you think, you need to level up your strategies, but you also need to level up your people. But how do you get people in your world and to perform at a high level? He's coached and trained some of the top teams and companies and organizations. He's known as the #1 DISC and adaptive leadership expert when it comes to hiring, retention, leadership, and he's a growth consultant. Welcome to the show, Alex.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Okay, so I want to just get right into it. If you are going to build a big business, you know that we can't do it on our own. You need people. How do you exactly explain to people what you do?
So one of the things that a lot of people struggle with when it comes to hiring or understanding people is, first off, in hiring, they hire for skill set. They want to make sure that the person has a history of doing the job. And that's the wrong thing to be looking at. But they need to look at is capability. Can the person do the job in our environment with our team based upon our leadership and the people that are going to follow them? And so what I do is I really help people understand people. Why do they think and act the way that they do? And how do you as a leader adapt your communication to get better results? I've got a background. I was an engineer supporting experimental flight tests for Boeing in the US military. I was also doing therapy work, one of the 100 mental health providers for the biggest shooting victims. And I was working with this woman, and she had a kid. And she said, "Hey, thank you for helping my kid. Can you help my 30 other kids?" And she introduced me into the real estate world. And it's really about helping people be seen. What I do is I help leaders understand their people. Bottom line, that's really what I do.
I love it. So I love 2 things that you said: helping people like be seen and helping people understand their people, right? And how to get the most out of them. So when people hire you, what results can they expect? You said all of that in a nutshell. So what have you seen as far as transformation, as far as when you come into these organizations? Because we all have what we say, like people issues or different things going on in our organization.
Triple the size, increased profitability, and increased effectiveness, and a lot less stress and fighting within the organization. A lot of my organizations I've worked with Tina Call, Brett Sakura, I've worked with Corinne Wynn, I've worked with a bunch of like really big teams across the country. And with all these different teams, what they found is that they were bringing better people in. They were keeping their people because the leaders could understand how to adapt to their needs. And they were able to get their people to produce better because they could change the way that they're communicating in order to get higher production. So they got better people, kept their people, and then got their people to produce more.
So how do they get better people? Is it like a personality test? Is it?
We start off with the personality test. So I administer a test called the Advanced Insight Assessment. I call it the Personality Blueprint. And what it does is it looks at how people behave, DISC assessment, what their intrinsic motivators are, the values index, and an axiology report, which looks at how you filter information. And when I say better people, the challenge is that the people I want to bring into Corinne's team are very different than the people I'm going to bring into Tina's team, which are very different than the people I'm going to bring into Brett's team, because all of these people have a culture within the organization. Better people is really not talking about the individual, but doing an assessment of the organization and going, who fits our culture to protect the integrity of the culture of the organization. And as the leaders become better at adapting, that spectrum grows, but you want to protect the integrity of what you bring in to make it easier to lead and easier to produce. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And as visionaries and as team owners and as leaders, we all love results. So where do you see on the flip side, leaders make mistakes today?
So visionaries and leaders are driven for results and they're motivated by money. And I've run 7,000 real estate agent profiles. I'm just focused on real estate because I worked in a variety of different industries. I've worked in finance, MGM, Navy Federal. I've worked with Intel, JL. So I've worked with corporate, but I'm focused on real estate here. So of the 7,000 real estate profiles I've run, most of the leaders are DI personality. They're drivers and they're high economic. They're focused on money. And 60% of their team are IS personalities, which have no drive. They're not going to follow the systems. And they're actually motivated by intrinsic to be unique and different. So you get leaders who are trying to lead their people the way they want to be led and motivate them the way they want to be motivated. And that's not their people. That's the biggest mistake I see in leadership.
Mm-hmm. So how do you bridge that gap?
Learning to adapt your communication. So I'm working with somebody, and so there's an agent. She is a low I personality type, not social, not outgoing, more introspective. She is a high economic, what's in it for me, low political, not big on taking care of my people, low altruistic, doesn't really like helping people in general. So basically, she's an antisocial person who doesn't like people, and she's in real estate. And everyone goes, oh my God, she can't be successful. Right, that reaction right there. That's the reaction everybody has. And I go, here's the thing. Next time you go into a listing appointment, what I want you to do is I want you to say, I don't actually care about you. And she goes, what? I can't say that. I go, no, here's what you say. My number one focus is getting your referral. And in order to do that, I'm going to provide you better service than every other agent out there who's lying and saying it's about you, because at least I'm being honest and telling you it's about me and my business. All of a sudden, she started getting referrals and she started to grow her business. And I taught her, instead of saying the script and using the words and engaging, ask better questions. So now she says that, and then she says, so let me ask you a question. And she starts asking questions. They sell themselves. So what did I do? As a leader, what I did was I created an environment where she could be successful because her success was dependent upon her strengths, and I mitigated her weakness. I just let her be her. That's where leaders can thrive, is by learning to adapt their leadership style to create based on who they are.
So good. So good. Some of you guys that are listening might rewind that, right? Because if you're watching on YouTube, you probably saw my reaction, like, what? So he totally broke it down in the best way possible. They say when it comes to these team environments and, building a team culture is super critical and very vital to the organization. How would you define culture? And it's probably one of the hardest things, especially as you start to expand in different markets. It's a hard thing to kind of measure and kind of keeps you up at night, I think.
It's interesting because it is, and it's not hard to measure. So as an engineer, using psychometric assessments, I put numbers to people, and I can tell you the culture of your organization, because if I run the entire organization, I look at the average of the profiles, I can tell you the profile of your organization. So that's an easy way to be able to go, what's the culture? Well, let's just run and create a profile. So then instead of having a profile for each individual person, we actually have a profile for your organization. And we have a profile for your leadership, so you can look at the difference. Now, that aside, what does culture mean? Culture, to me, is the interference pattern between all of the people in your community or environment. So you, as an individual, have a certain personality type. I have a certain personality type. Culture is when we come into a space, how does that interference pattern create and present itself? That interference pattern is what we are labeling as culture.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love it. What makes a great team dynamic as you work with so many different organizations and different people?
There are two dynamics that I find to be very successful. And you can choose one or choose the other, but you've got to choose one side or the other. One team is you create one specific group of people that are very similar in personality type. They get really good at what they do, and they work with people that are like them. That's one model, and it works really well. The other model is you get a broad range of people and leadership who can adapt to those people to be able to maintain the integrity of the organization. Either one's okay. They both have strengths and weaknesses. The larger group, more diversified, can reach more people. Smaller group, niche, easier to lead, and focused on a specific client. The biggest thing between the two of those is either way, you need to have an integrative foundation. As a company, purpose, mission, vision, values. What's important to the company? What do you run by? Some vision that's bigger than the leader of the company that everyone can buy into. When they buy into the common vision and you support the intrinsic motivators of each person on your team, that's where your team thrives. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So if somebody was to start over, because I always hear from some of the teams, I want to just burn the boats, right? I want to fire everybody. If they were to start over, what would you say would be the necessary steps for them starting over?
So two different options. One, you want to start from scratch, get rid of everybody, create a company separate from yourself. Almost every team sucks at doing this. Your team should have a separate purpose, mission, vision, values than you do, because you need people to buy into it and you need to make decisions based on the company's needs, not yours. So you need to separate yourself. That's the first thing. The second thing is get clear on who are go, no-goes, not whether the person is good or bad, whether they'll be successful or not, whether you want them in the organization or not, what are the no-goes, the standards for the organization, and then build from there. That is really where a solid foundation comes from. You need to know who you are, start with the being, and what's allowed and not allowed. That's the doing, and that'll allow you to grow. The other side is if you have a team and you want to burn the boats, but you don't actually want to burn the boats, because if you do, you lose all of your income and you don't really want to do that, but you just want to do it because the people are driving you nuts. Learn your people. Like, take the time, do an assessment. You can use one of mine, you can use somebody else's, I don't care, but like, do an evaluation of your team and figure out, why are these people driving you nuts? What's going on? Because 9 times out of 10, the people aren't the problem. Your inability to adapt and your lack of leadership skills are actually the issue. It's not that this person isn't motivated. It's that you as a leader are ineffective at motivating them. Two different pieces.
Can you repeat that one more time for our listeners?
Yes. It's not that your agents or your team, it's not that they're not motivated. It's that you as a leader are ineffective at motivating them.
That right there was why I was like, he needs to be on this podcast.
There's an organization that I worked with, and I ran the profiles of their elite, the top of the top. And every single leader in this organization, and they're the top producers across the entire world. These top producers all had certain character traits, and every single one had these certain traits, and none of them, 0 of them had certain traits. And everyone's like, oh, cool, I need that so I can go through my entire organization and find these people so we can pull them up. I said, or you need to ask why you guys as an organization have created a culture where every single one of this type of personality isn't in this room.
So good. Speaking of like assessments and personality and behaviors, what would you recommend? You mentioned some of yours. What would you recommend, or do you not recommend them?
Assessment. So I've got one. If you go to youdon'tknowdisc.com/free ADV, you can get a free assessment. It provides a 20-page assessment, all for you, no cost. I like that particular assessment because it allows you to look at behaviors, values, which is intrinsic motivators, and how people filter information. I absolutely hate assessments. And the reason why is because almost every assessment is used to put people into a box, and that's not how they work. And like DISC, for instance, the top DISC trainers, they teach that the DISC is fixed. And whatever you are, you're a D, you're an I. That's what you're always going to be. And I go, DISC measure behavior. Behavior changes over time. How can something that measures a movable thing never change? That makes no sense to me. And people are like, wow, that's incredible. This has been around since 1920s. How has no one asked this question? It makes no sense to me. But the benefit of the assessments, and this isn't just my assessments, this is the Enneagram, Myers-Briggs, I'm certified in all of them. I love them from the language they give us to understand the spectrums people operate in. I hate them from a classification standpoint. I was just doing a training earlier today and I talked with somebody. I'm like, this is the high S. And they're like, no, I'm a high S, but that doesn't fit me. I go, I know. This is a probability. Most high S's operate this way. And if you're not that way, cool. Then that means you're not one of the statistical probabilities. That's okay. Mm-hmm. But getting to understand the language gives you a good idea. And then you actually have to go like shake someone's hand and talk to them because they're real people.
Yeah, no, for sure. So is there a right time to do these personality assessments or these assessments? Should it be during the interview process? Should it be as you start to grow and scale your company? Because sometimes your company can also start to look different and sometimes talent doesn't always follow you. Like, when is like the right time to do these assessments? Is there?
From a personal perspective, I recommend doing them. Like for me, I do mine every quarter, and you got to take it honestly. You got to answer it as honestly as you can. But every life event that you have shapes who you are. So anytime you have a major significant life change, you should test yourself just to see where you are. From a leadership perspective, I say you should do it every quarter. And if you're not going to do it every quarter, whenever you're making a change. So if you're hiring people and you're going through a hiring process, If you've got like a specific big person you're bringing in, like a director of operations, director of sales, you really got to look at the entire organization and then look at the individual and use it as part of your hiring process. If your team culture has changed or you're trying to make a change or a shift, understanding the dynamics is important because it tells you how you should communicate the change. So if people hear things a certain way, whether the resistance, it's not a resistance to change. There's certain ways you need to communicate change to get it implemented and encouraged by people. So anytime you're making a change in an organization, hiring, adjusting, changing direction, leadership, I recommend doing assessments because they give you a good snapshot as to where people are and help you put together a strategic plan to move forward intentionally with that.
So good. So good. So you've been doing this work for quite some time. Are
Yes.
there ones that you would avoid that are popular out there that, teams or real estate agents should not use when it comes to hiring?
When it comes to hiring, one of the ones that like there's two particularly that jump into mind from a hiring perspective,
Mhm.
Myers-Briggs and Strength Finders. Both of them are not EEOC compliant. So if you're going to do an assessment, you got to make sure it's EEOC compliant. And what that means is that it doesn't have proven bias. That Myers-Briggs and the Strength Finders both have gender and racial bias built in. And on their websites, they say it's unethical to use for hiring purposes. So from a hiring perspective, especially from a legal perspective to cover your own butt as a hirer, you want to make sure that whatever assessments you're using are compliant with EEOC and can be used for a hiring process. It's very important.
Wow. I didn't even know that. So interesting.
Well, it's so
Okay.
funny because so many people, it's like, oh yeah, go take this Myers-Briggs. So I go take it and I'm looking and on the website, it literally says in the disclaimer, unethical to use for hiring purposes has been known to have gender and racial bias. And yet the employer was sending us to go take this assessment.
Yeah. I mean, I've taken a few of those and I'm just like, oh, that's interesting. So, as one of the things when I was like reading and learning about you, one of the things you do is improve integrative leadership. What is that for our audience and how do you do that?
So integrative leadership is about being able to look at the mental, emotional, and the physical, and being able to take the approach of understanding that there's a whole person. There is energy. Energy is everywhere around us. Understanding the influences of energy in our interactions, understanding how different people think, how they process things, understanding emotions, and how to either avoid emotional baggage or intentionally fire it off in order to get people to move. Because sometimes people are like, oh, you want to avoid their baggage? I go, no, sometimes you need to use it to get them to move. You're a coach. I'm sure you do it all the time. It's like, oh, you really don't care that much about your kids? So and then they go. It's like, cool. So you need to understand how to utilize emotion to drive behavior. And then also physical environment, making sure that people are walking, taking care of themselves, because the physical health can influence the mental and the emotional as well. So integrative leadership is broadening the spectrum of telling people what to do, more direction than leadership, to creating a safe and secure environment for your people to follow. There's a book called The Power of Showing Up by Dan Siegel, and it's talking about parenting.
Mhm.
And he talks about creating secure attachment. And it's great for parents, any parent, anybody should really read the book. But I flipped his model slightly and made it for leadership. So as a leader, the four things that you need to do is you need to make your people, well, technically, you only need to make them feel safe and feel protected, but you can't make someone feel safe who isn't seen. And you can't protect someone who doesn't feel accepted. And so in order to create an environment where your team will stay and thrive, you need to help them feel seen, safe, accepted, and protected, because at that point, they're willing to take risks, which allows you to empower them to grow. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And when as you say that, I also believe that with kids,
Yes.
they want all those factors. And you and I were talking offline, yesterday about my kids, and when you have siblings and when you said that, like everybody wants to feel that. Even
Yeah. And with kids, it's incredible. So I've got a great parenting coach. Her name is Sammy Bell. She is Sure Parenting. She wrote a book and she is a godsend to me. And she's the one who introduced these books to me. And kids, it's like they need to feel seen, like you responding to their wants, their needs, knowing what's going on. It's attunement is what it's about. Soothe. They don't have the ability to regulate their own emotions. So you need to help them regulate their emotions. They need to feel secure. They need to know they have a place to come back to. And like they need to feel safe, like they they've got an environment that's okay and protective. They need to feel connected to people. And all of those aspects are what create a secure attachment. And when I started looking, adults didn't like the term soothe. They felt like it was like placating. And so I just changed the words around. It's the same concept, but now people like it because it's eat as opposed to soothe.
I love it. And I was so impressed, by the way, yesterday when we were kind of talking at the event, how you were able to, you said something about energy, and you met a good friend of mine named Maria, and she's been on the podcast, and you were just like, bam, bam, bam. And she was just like, her face and her eyes were like, this guy really does know me.
Yeah. So it's really entertaining. So in today's class, I kind of gave away some of the secret with it. But when I walk up to somebody, I can literally sit down. Well, I mean, that's what I did with her, is I can meet someone and I can tell you exactly what their personality type is, which goes back to what I was talking about with the spectrums. I don't like profiles because they put people in boxes. But if you understand the language of the profiles and you can quickly assess, okay, this person has this personality, and this personality type. So now I've got a probability. Now I start to talk about it and they're like, shit, this guy knows me. So then I watch for reactions and it allows me to calibrate. So being able to cold read somebody is really about understanding people operate from here to here and then go, okay, so this person is here. So if they're here, these are the character traits of people that are here. And then it makes it really easy to quickly assess and have a conversation. So if you're doing sales, you're doing leadership, you're going to the bar to pick somebody up, like to be able to quickly have a conversation and in 30 seconds know exactly who that person is, probably better than they know themselves. It's a really cool trick.
I mean,
it's a lot of fun, but
yeah, it was like 30 seconds. And I was like, wait, you just asked her name.
Pretty much. And most of it is physiology. I can tell from physiology how they're sitting, how they're standing, when they're looking at people as I talk. Are they paying attention to me or other people? But the reason it's funny because it always gets a cool reaction and it's a cool like party trick. But more than that, it creates a sense of safety. I've worked with kids who have literally shot themselves and survived. I've worked with victims who have been tragically abused. I have worked with abusers who've never admitted their issues, but are still able to come and talk to me. And when you see somebody and you can tell them, I see you, and they feel safe, the world of possibility opens up for what you can do to help them.
So good. I mean, that also boils down to communication. It's one thing to feel seen, but it's also something to communicate that thoroughly in an organization or through your employees. And communication is something that I think is very, very important, especially when you're running a business or you're growing a team. And not everyone is in an office in today's environment, especially after the pandemic, right? You have remote workers, you have people across the world, you have different cultures now, you have people that work for us offshores. What tips and advice would you give to somebody that wants to increase peak performance, that have different people that are not in the same office, that are through conversations like this, through Zoom and across the world?
I think the first thing is that they need to understand communication. So communication is, a lot of people use it like it's a word, and it's not. It's not a thing. It's a process. Communication. We need to improve our communication. There's not enough communication. That's like it's a thing, but it's not. So what I've done is there's a 6-step process, and it goes form, package, deliver, receive, unpack, associate. You control the first 3. What you think, you package it up, you give it to the other person. You talk, you share, you email, you give it to the other person. The other person then takes it. They need to interpret what it means. They unpack it. But then this is the key. This is why this is important. It then activates a neural network of associations. When you're working with teams that aren't local, you have to keep in mind that your associations are different. So when you're communicating and you say home has a different meaning to me than it does to you, but they both fire off a representation of our residents. But now if we start talking with somebody else, that may mean something else in their culture. It may mean something else to them. They may have had a bad experience at home. It may not be a good place. It may not, it's like you and I, just from our conversation, this isn't everybody, but you and I talk and we go home, and there is because it's like we travel and we do this stuff and then we get to go home.
Yeah.
And there's just magic in that word home. But for some people, there's terror in that word home. And for some people, there's joy in that word home. And so when you're talking, you have to keep in mind that the language that you use goes out and it activates a network. And that's what people are responding to. So if you have to change your communication to be able to activate a different network, your goal is to activate the right network to get the results you're looking for.
What a great example. Yeah, I never even thought about it that way. Like that word home can be defined in so many different ways from different people.
Well, and
Never.
it's funny because I talk about in real estate and I go, we have home, we have a residence, we have a house, and we have inventory. And all of those are referencing something, but they all invoke a different feeling.
100%. What do you think stops people from like growing their teams or having people? What I find often in some of the teams as they're building and scaling is they start losing people and keep people.
Getting attached to the right way. They're too attached to what is right as opposed to what works. And so the individual they're talking, it's like, yeah, but I've had success and this is how I did it. So they need to do it this way. And I go, yeah, but if it's not working for them, maybe they need to do it differently. Or, yeah, but it's not. I had this person I was talking with. They were saying to their person, everybody who's successful has done it this way. And if you just follow the process, you'll be successful too. And the other person wants to be seen as unique and different and doesn't like to follow the rules. So all I said is, and it was about making calls. It was about making calls. Mm-hmm. And I said, and she wouldn't make the calls. And he kept pushing and pushing. So all I said was, here's the thing. You're different than everybody else. I need you to break the rules. I want you to text them first and don't wait for a response, but then pick up the phone and call. Mm-hmm. I gave her more to do, but because I made her unique and different and I allowed her to break the rules, now all of a sudden she just hooked up and she made more calls than everybody else that day.
You also probably gave her freedom too, to do
Yep.
something that's innate in her that she doesn't want to follow rules. Some people don't like rules.
So letting go of your judgment of all other realities. One of the things I have people do. So if you draw a dot and a circle around it, everybody inside of the circle is your sphere of influence, and they're always right, which means if you disagree with them, there's something you're not understanding. Mm-hmm. So all of the listeners who are here, if you have a pen and paper and you're taking notes, write down the equation 8 + 8 = 91. And you and I are talking, you look at that equation and I look at that equation. So if you had that written down, I said, is that equation right or wrong? You tell me that was wrong. And I'd say it's right. And you go, no, it's wrong. I said, here's the thing. We're both looking at the same equation. You think it's right. Or you think it's wrong. I think it's right. What do you think about that? And they go, they can't both be. You're obviously an idiot. And I laughed and I said, no, here's the deal. And I flipped the paper around and he goes, oh shit. I go, right. 16 = 8 + 8. Mm. I'm looking at 8 + 8 = 91. You flip it around, you're looking at 16 = 8 + 8. I'm looking at the same equation you are, but because my perspective is different, I think it's right. You think it's wrong. And we are both correct. Letting go that there can't be a conflict and both be correct is where most leaders fail.
Oh my gosh. So good. What's one lesson as you study people and as you study behaviors and you work with a lot of different personalities? What's one lesson that you've learned that has impacted your journey today?
People are weird.
People are weird.
People are weird. Like there's so much. It's like, oh my God, how can they do that? I'm like, that's really a good question. I don't know. Let's just figure it out. It's you can't. The disappointment comes from unmet expectations. And if you just expect people to be weird, then whatever they do, it's going to happen. And then you got to figure out and navigate it from there. Yep. You celebrate the wins, you put the change out in the future instead of the past, and you keep moving forward. Every single person is right. And yeah, people are weird. It's like, why did they do that? Like, I have no idea, but apparently it's what they did. So now let's figure out what are we going to do and how do we handle it? It's not right or wrong. Is no right or wrong. Let's just talk about what is and what we want and figure out what that difference is, because that's really where we should be focusing.
Yeah, it's the same thing that I say. It's just a condition. It's just a condition. People are weird. It's a condition. How do we solve it?
I love that. I'm totally stealing condition. I'm stealing that.
Yeah,
I love
it's not
that.
a challenge. It's just a business condition. It's a team condition. So how do we solve it?
Oh, that's one of my favorite things. I hear it a lot. So it's like the use of the word but. It's the use of the word but. oh, don't use the word but. You got to use and, or you got to use. And so you
Or
hear people go, da, 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 and I'm like, all you've done is you haven't actually stopped using the word but. You just put a new label on the word and then made and mean but. Like that's
yeah,
all you did.
yeah,
And I love because when you talk about it, you say it's not a challenge, it's a condition. And you've switched the thing from a challenge to a condition. And the key is that you've actually changed the thing from a challenge to a condition, not changed the label of challenge to condition.
yeah.
You're not calling it a condition and still looking at it as a challenge. And that's why you thrive. That's why you are successful, is because of that flip. You actually make the thing a condition, which is something that can be treated.
Oh, I could totally talk about conditions, realities, and values and labels. Oh, we can go on and on and on. Because we work with people and we work with, trying to get them results or trying to get them to the goals. Yeah. So it's a new perspective. Everyone has a different perspective. It's the same thing when a CEO writes an email. Everybody will react in it in a totally different way in your organization, whether you have 5 or whether you have 100, right? And some people will read it and some people won't read it all the way through and some people will totally ignore it. But that doesn't mean anything. It's just a condition and we've got to solve it.
Yeah.
You mentioned some books and it sounds like you are a reader. What's one great book that you would recommend to our audience when it comes to some of the things that we talked about today?
It's interesting. Some of the most powerful and profound books, The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. A lot of the time where we create our own trauma is by not being in the present moment. But more than that, it's about putting our change in the past. How could I have handled that better? Never ask yourself, how could I have handled that better? Instead, next time, if that happens again, how am I going to handle that? That puts your change where it belongs in the future, not guilt, not shame. So The Power of Now is a really good book. I do recommend The Power of Showing Up and Recovering from Emotionally Immature Parents. There are 2 parenting books that are incredible, but more than just parenting books, they help you understand why you do what you do and how you show up. And I think that that's pivotal. Anything that helps you understand you. And then the last book is a book called The Slight Edge by Jeff Olson. And Jeff is an incredible dude. I love him. He and I, we've had some good drinks at the MGM over the years. Just his idea and philosophy about the compound effect of our daily actions. And then the other one is whatever you do to be successful in one area of your life, if you apply the same principles, you will have the same success in other areas. And I think that that is one of the most profound things that has really helped me in all of this, is to go, whatever works for you works for you. So do it.
Yep. So what's next for Alex?
What is next for Alex?
What are you most excited that you're working on right now?
Honestly, I've got my first group running through my certification program, and I'm teaching people how to literally cold read individuals. And I've got my first group, it's my beta class, and they're doing great and they're loving it. But literally getting it so that you can walk up to someone, shake their hand, and know their personality, just like I did. But I'm actually able to now, I've done it enough that I can teach other people to do it. And that's what I'm really most excited about. I'm traveling around doing leadership and training development, but being able to teach people to cold read, that's fun.
Oh my gosh, I want to sign up. Where's the link? That is so cool. Where can people connect with you?
So if you follow me, I am My Disc Guy on Instagram. You can find me on my website, youdon'tknowdisc.com, or you can hit me up on YouTube at My Disc Guy. So right now that's where everything's kind of located.
Love it. And as we wrap up, there's always one question that I ask every guest that comes on the show is, what does Alex do to play bigger in business or in life?
As a young man, all of my friends wanted to be James Bond. He had the guns, he had the girls, he had the money, he had the poise. The one thing that I'm doing to play bigger is I quit trying to be Bond. And I always ask myself this question, Bond or Barry? And the reason why is because James Barry is the guy who created Neverland. So you can create and chase the money and the success and all that stuff. And for me, I want to go create magic. I want to inspire people in hope and possibility, and to live in the world where magic is real, and to go inspire other people to believe in it. And so a lot of those things, like when I do the 30-second cold read, it's not about showing off. It's about teaching people magic is real. And that's why I do what I do.
That is cool. You're way better than David Copperfield or whatever in Las Vegas, right?
Right.
Well, Alex,
Oh,
I
yeah.
have so enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much for being on our show. I appreciate you. I can't wait to support you and keep seeing you play bigger, my friend.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you guys for listening. I look forward until we meet again. Bye for now.